salivary glands to release water and electrolytes. It turns out these glands seem to have both sympathetic and parasympathetic innervations. All, as you recall from the other day, that the sympathetic innervations are traveling with the blood supply. So they're traveling with the external carotid to all these various arteries to these various glands, and they stimulate enzyme secretions. So the saliva is a combination of water and electrolytes with enzymes, and part of it's controlled by parasympathetics and part of it's controlled by sympathetics. These are copies. So saliva, what does saliva do? Okay, it's obviously the first step in food processing and essentially in digestion. It also seems to be involved in the development of enamel and can remineralize various lesions. You produce quite a bit of this stuff, so 22 to 41 ounces. That's over a quart of saliva a day. But not very much at night, thank heavens. It probably choke to death. Certainly you wake up with a very wet pillow. Okay. So realize there's a lot of saliva production. You've got 3 glands, and every time you chew, you know your mouth fills with saliva, or every time you chew bubble gum or anything like that. Or you read a menu or something. Okay. So we've gone through everything about the hard and soft palate, a little bit of salivary glands, the submandibular region, all these muscles. Many of these you've seen before, right? The digastric. We saw it, right? Digastric, it has 2 parts, a posterior belly, a tendon that's attached to the hyoid bone, and then an anterior belly. The stylohyoid, you've seen that one, which actually follows the posterior belly of the digastric, but stops on the hyoid itself. The mylohyoid, remember, which comes in from both sides and forms the floor of the mouth. You have not seen the geniohyoid. We're going to see that in cross-section in pictures here, and you will dissect it out. The word hyoid is in these 3 because that's where the muscles attach to some degree. And then the digastric doesn't actually have an origin or insertion on the hyoid, but it has that intermediate tendon that is tethered to the hyoid that separates the posterior and anterior bellies. Okay, just to review, the hyoid here is sort of a horseshoe-shaped structure with a greater horn posteriorly, and this great big flat body, well, a great big flat about the size of one of your fingers, anteriorly, and then little lesser horns poking up near the front end of it. So it's a pretty distinctive structure. I'm sure you realize in the course of your dissection that doesn't have a bony attachment to any of the other bones of the body. As a result, it can sort of float up and down. So in some of your dissections, the hyoid maybe was down here in the neck. In others, you couldn't find it because it was way up under hidden by the mandible. So it's all these muscles that attach to it and various other structures, but it doesn't have a bony connection, so it moves around a lot in the area between the lower jaw and the neck. Okay, old friends. The digastric originates in the digastric fossa up here near the mastoid process. Okay, comes down, loops around this pulley down here. Okay, and then the anterior belly attaches into the hyoids in the area known as there's a little fossa here on the front of the mandible. Stylohyoid originates from the styloid process just in front of the posterior belly of the digastric, and it travels down, sort of wraps around this intermediate tendon and inserts into the hyoid itself, back here into the greater horn along this whole back area. And then there's the mylohyoid, right, which originates on the inner surface of the mandible on either side, and these sort of come down like a hammock, forming the floor of the mouth one from the right and one from the left. And they basically, the two parts on either side, join together in this midline raphe, but in the back here, they also attach to the hyoid bone. Beneath the tongue, so the tongue's basically been lifted out of the way here. The tongue would be right up in here. Above the mylohyoid are these paired muscles extending from the body of the hyoid back here and going into the front of the mandible, something known as the genial tubercles. Okay, there's a big bump here where genioglossus, the big tongue muscle we'll see in a few minutes, originates, and below that is the genioglossus muscle. So it attaches to the front end of the hyoid, and then it connects the front end of the hyoid to the lower part of the mandibular symphysis. Okay, this is considered the origin because the mandible is a little bit more stable than the hyoid. Okay, a cross section of the tongue. So here's the hard palate and cross section. The tongue has not been severed. Down here, so here's the mandibular symphysis. This is the midline, this is the lower lip, this is the upper lip. Okay, here's the hyoid bone in the back. Right, so here's stylohyoid coming down, wrapping around that intermediate tendon of the digastric. So here's the mylohyoid, the one you saw when we did the neck. Here's the geniohyoid, okay, that we just talked about a minute ago. Coming in, well, that's again stylohyoid back there. Let's go back. Okay, so these are the ones we've talked about so far. Now we're going to go through all these guys. Okay, let's go through now. Those are muscles. Those are the muscles we just talked about. They basically went to the hyoid and to the mandible. Genioglossus or hyoglossus sort of. Well, never mind. Those are the muscles that go into the submandibular region. Now we're going to talk about the muscles of the tongue themselves, the ones that actually move the tongue, make the tongues do all the things that tongues can do. Okay, there are 4 muscles, and fortunately they all have the word glossus, which means tongue, in them. And they come from different other bones that you can, or other structures, and go into the tongue so that they move the tongue in various ways from the outside. Okay, genioglossus, we just talked about the genial tubercle, this area in the front of the mandible. It's going to go from there into the tongue, muscular tongue itself. Hyoglossus, going to go from the hyoid bone into the tongue. Styloglossus is going from the back, the styloid process in the back, into the tongue from the front. And palatoglossus, which we've seen before, coming from the soft palate and going down to the tongue. And as you can probably visualize, these things are going to be able to move the tongue in various different directions from its position. In addition, the tongue itself has a whole bunch of different muscles within it. So when you slice open the tongue, you'll see fibers going in a variety of different directions that can move the tongue in different ways. So let's go over these and see where they lie, what they look like, and what they do. Okay, genioglossus. Remember we talked about this genial tubercle at the mandibular symphysis. This is the big muscle. This is much of the tongue muscle itself that originates on the front of the mandible in here, and then radiates in all different directions to form most of the body of the tongue. Okay? And I think you can figure out, if it originates right here on the inner surface of the mandible, most of the fibers are going posteriorly, when you contract genioglossus, you're going to pull the tongue forward. You're going to pull the back of the tongue forward and a little bit down. Basically, that's the muscle you use to stick your tongue out. It pulls this whole back of the yes. See, very good, very good. You got an example? What? Okay, so that's what's going to happen. They're pulling the base of the tongue forward, and you can stick it out in the front of your mouth. Okay. Here's where genioglossus originates, okay, and then the fibers come all the way back into the body of the tongue. Okay, hyoglossus, as the name implies, it comes off of most of the hyoid bone here, the whole side of the hyoid bone, extends superiorly into basically the middle of the tongue, so it's a vertical muscle. Whereas genioglossus is running fan shape, but mostly anterior, posterior, and superiorly. This one's running from below, the hyoid bone below, up into the tongue vertically. So it originates from the greater horn and body of the hyoid, extends superiorly into the side and lower part of the tongue. So when it contracts, it's going to pull the tongue downward. And there should be a little arrow. Okay. Styloglossus. I think you're getting a theme here, right? Starts back here on this styloid process, right at the back of the base of the skull. Extends forward into the back end of the tongue. We didn't mention it earlier, but when you dissect out the tonsillar bed, you can usually find styloglossus lying right under there. It goes from the styloid process back, inserts onto the side and bottom of the tongue here. So when it contracts, it's going to pull the tongue that way, mainly superiorly and posteriorly. And let's show the little arrow. Okay. And then the one we've talked about several times, the one the palatoglossus that surrounds the tonsillar bed, coming from the soft palate up here, this palatine aponeurosis, and going into the side of the tongue, forming the palatoglossal arch that surrounds the tonsil. And again, like styloglossus, it's coming from a superior and posterior position and going into the back of the tongue. So when it contracts, it's going to basically pull the tongue up and a little bit backwards. Okay, so just to review, sticking out the tongue is basically genioglossus. Okay. Retracting the tongue, pulling it backwards. A little bit of hyoglossus and styloglossus certainly pulls it back. Depressing the tongue, pulling it downward, is hyoglossus because it's mostly a vertical muscle, and part of genioglossus, the more vertical parts of genioglossus can pull the tongue down. And the palatoglossus, the tiny little thing over there, can actually, well, in addition to its role in closing off the mouth, it can sort of pull up the back of the tongue. And geniohyoid, which goes from the mandibular symphysis back to the hyoid, pulls the hyoid anteriorly relative to the mandible, but realize that since some of these muscles are attached to the hyoid properly, that affects the action of those muscles. So it's fairly complex, but it seems to work. Okay, so these are the kind of things, these are things you're going to find in your dissection, and this is the real key when you're dissecting the area on the side and underneath the tongue. This is what you're going to look for. Okay, so your submandibular gland is back here in the back. Right? The sublingual glands are sitting here on the side, right up against the body of the mandible. You remember from the infratemporal fossa, here's your inferior alveolar nerve and artery going into the mandible itself. So they're going to be traveling down within the body of the mandible. And a little bit anterior and medial to them was the lingual nerve. The lingual nerve enters laterally, right, on the inner surface of the mandible, loops under this submandibular duct to supply the tongue, right? It's carrying sensation from the chorda tympani, sensation from V3 and taste from the V7 from V7 through the chorda tympani, but it's going to loop under. So when you open up the side of the mouth there tomorrow, you see this big submandibular duct heading forward, right, where it's going to have its exit right there. The lingual nerve is going to loop under it. So it starts on the lateral surface, loops under it, and then heads forward. Okay, here's a side view, and it's basically the same thing. So here's the submandibular duct coming back here from the big submandibular gland in the back, extending forward to its caruncle right there. And then the lingual nerve looping under it and going into the tongue. Nerves and vessels. Obviously, we've been through this duct again. There's your lingual nerve again. There's the hyoglossus on the side. Okay, well, let's look at there's no surprise, the blood supply to the area under the tongue is the lingual artery, hence the name. Okay, it's a branch of the external carotid, right? It's a third one up, right? Your superior thyroid, second one up, superior thyroid, lingual, and then facial. Sometimes you'll find facial and lingual actually have a common origin, and you can separate them out here. But it comes forward and basically goes into the base of the tongue, where it splits, okay, and gives rise to a deep lingual that goes up into the tongue, and a sublingual that stays down here where genioglossus is. But you can find the lingual nerve is coming in from above, the lingual artery and lingual veins are coming in from below. So there's the vein. Okay, so there's the sublingual vein, just like there's a sublingual artery, deep lingual veins, and a deep lingual artery. So the arteries and veins basically travel together. Okay, there they are on the side when you're down into the bed of the underside of the mandible. Okay, then there's another big nerve, as you know, the hypoglossal, which is mainly responsible for